back on to help me go through this crazy debate that we all witnessed with Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz. I've got to say, J.D. Vance just absolutely dominated. He looked vice presidential. He represented MAGA and Donald Trump well. To help me go through all this, I have Drew Allen. Drew, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, always good to be with you and your amazing audience. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for coming on. So just quickly, what were your thoughts of the debate? And did you feel like J.D. Vance had a good performance for the night?
Yeah, I did. I mean, if you want to compare it to the last ABC debate with Trump and Kamala Harris, I mean, Trump, it was, 3 versus 1. And I'd say it was kind of a draw, actually, in the end, if you look at the poll results and what people actually took away from that debate after they digested it. And in this case, it was 3 versus 1 again, but Vance came out the clear winner. And the biggest thing that I noticed with this that is more in tune with what people I disagree with, out there, what they think, which is, people are kind of longing for this past era of civility with politics, right? And in my opinion, a lot of these people don't recognize that we're dealing with, hard Marxism and communism now. It's not, the foe is not what it used to be. In many ways, it's more serious. But all that said, Trump is a different beast. People are uncomfortable with him being from Queens and kind of the way he talks. And he's not the greatest debater on the planet, certainly. But people kind of long for that Reagan-esque kind of quality, right? That kind of gentle civility. And I think that Vance pulled that off last night. And I think that he did something that I thought maybe was impossible, which was to convince people out there that, hey, I mean, that thing that you're longing for, it actually maybe can exist today in this climate with the right person. And Vance was that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great quote from RFK Sr., and I don't have the exact quote, so I'll just give you the gist of it. But he basically said, if things aren't working under the current leadership, the only thing you can do is change out the leader. And I think people are feeling that. They're like, wait a minute, I need a more affordable America. And they long for the days of Donald Trump when inflation was 1.9%, groceries were easily affordable, wages were going up. And I think J.D. Vance did a good job of explaining that nostalgia and having people feel that through the screen. Let me go through a clip from last night, and then we'll go ahead and react to it.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. Governor, you say.
All right, let me stop there. I just noticed this. When I grabbed that clip for us to look at, I'm looking at J.D. Vance because he's the one speaking, right? Like it draws my ears and my eyes. But this time I was actually looking at Tim Walz, and he's like panicked. He's like going back and forth. J.D. Vance brought up some good points. Like, when did putting America second or last make America better? We were sold a bunch of lies, and Donald Trump has brought that truth back to the forefront of people's mind, that putting America, American workers, American sustainability back in our country is what will make us strong. Your thoughts there?
Well, he did successfully and effectively, I think, repeatedly make the point to the American people via that debate that, hey, you lived under Trump. So Walz can say all these things about what Kamala Harris is going to do, and he can make all these wild accusations about what Trump is going to do that you should be scared of. And yet we already lived under Trump, and none of these things that you're saying he's going to do that are scary happened in his previous administration. But I want to point something else out about that clip in particular, because Vance did something that has been missing from the Republican Party, even via Trump, for a long time. And that is, getting effectively to the root cause, to use kind of a Kamala Harris phrase for the border, the root cause of the problems in this country in relation to the government. And we don't have very many effective politicians who will explain the broader picture of what's wrong. Right. So we get caught up in the minutia of the conversation, but we don't actually educate the American people about what we believe and what the benefits of conservatism or constitutionalism are. And he did that. So when he says, we've listened to the experts, it's really brilliant, a masterclass, because this is one of the techniques and strategies of the left, which is they repeatedly point to experts, whether it's climate change or COVID lockdowns, right? They're particular experts, and we're supposed to believe them, even if it doesn't line up with reality and truth and experience. And so he is really taking the feet out from under Democrats there by making the American people question now, hey, you're right. You guys keep talking about experts, whether it's the economy, all these experts, right? The same experts that said that the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't real, that it was Russian disinformation, those experts. So this is an effective tool that Marxists and certainly the left use in this country. And if people wake up to the fact that, hey, when they say experts, that's like a code word for some kind of propaganda. And so I thought that was what was really effective about him drawing attention to that.
Yeah, the first time I noticed that was 2 times the CBS moderator said, top scientists say that climate change is real. And then they talked about it. And then before moving on to the next question, again, according to CBS, top scientists say that climate change is real, right? It's like, okay, nobody is refuting the fact that that climate changes. We're just saying, like, what are you going to do if the ocean rises? Like, the ocean is going to do what the ocean's going to do. And yet, it hasn't risen 500 feet, right? Like all the Al Gore predictions have not come true. Anyway, I don't want to get off on that, but yeah, the top scientific experts. Well, the same people that told us that the Moderna and Pfizer shot were safe. And now we've seen 1,000% increases in myocarditis and cancers and different things like that. Those same experts. And another thing that Governor Tim Walz tried to do was directly blame Donald Trump for the border. He would say things like, JD, you're doing a good job, but the guy that you've decided to associate with, he's the reason that we're having this border issue. And then JD Vance replied with this: we have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportation, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system that has opened the floodgates. Why would they try to blame the border crisis on Donald Trump when even Democrats say, wow, this border crisis with fentanyl and illegals definitely happened under Kamala Harris?
Well, they don't really have any good options that are going to lead them to a victory on the issue, if you will, unless they come out and simply admit that they were wrong and promise to change course and say that Trump was right. And they're not going to do that. So they want it both ways, right? You'll hear the Democrats talk about how, now they've come back to levels that, were from many years ago, after letting in 20 million more or less illegals into this country. Now they kind of celebrate that, now the border crossings are down. So what are you admitting, that actually you are capable of bringing those border crossings down and it was negligence or intent that you allowed it to go on as long as you did? So they want to try and pretend like they've got this under control, while at the same time, they can't very well do that. And so they're blaming it on Trump. And so it's an impossible situation. But, it's really offensive to those of us who have a couple of brain cells left to rub together between our ears when they bring up this pathetic border bill, which is the equivalent of that Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with inflation. It was a lie, it was a fraud, and it was a trick of the eye, if you will, to pull from the French term. But that bill, of course, was going to legalize illegal immigration. And in that bill, too, the way they view Border Patrol, it's not to actually enforce the border or to prevent people from coming in. They want to repurpose them almost as like Red Cross humanitarian aids that are going to exist to help facilitate additional illegals coming in here. So it's such a joke that they bring up this bill. And of course, it's also true that, okay, even if this bill were amazing, why did it take you, 3 years to propose something like that? We're supposed to forgive all because, you came to your sense after 20 million were allowed in. And one thing too, Stephen, that I think the American people saw last night as Walz struggled to grapple with this impossible situation with the border is that the Democrat Party basically took the side of illegals, and Walz took the side of illegals last night. And he said something that really bothers me, which of course is he claims that if you whether it's Haitian illegals or other illegals that have come in this country, if you point out the fact that they are destroying the country or the culture, which is true, it's objectively true, they say that you're going to get them hurt, that's bigoted and horrible. And yet the things that we're saying that are true about the illegal situation, which we have the right to say, they don't have a right to be here, and they are a drain on everything. We can't survive. No nation can survive with illegal immigration like this. They've said far worse about you or me or any sane person in this country or MAGA, comparing us to Hitler and Nazis. Nobody's saying that about the Haitians. And last time I checked, there haven't been 2 assassination attempts against any Haitian illegal in this country, but there have been 2 against Donald Trump. And so they want to silence our voices and shut us up about pointing out the biggest issue the Democrats face in this election, which is the illegal invasion of our border, by saying you can't say these things about the illegals. Meanwhile, these people haven't taken down their rhetoric a notch since 2 failed assassination attempts on Trump. I mean, the Commerce Secretary went on TV just the other day in the Biden administration and said that we need to, extinguish Trump.
Yeah. Well, even last night, CNN was interviewing Don Jr., and he brought up the fact that because of the mainstream media and their vile rhetoric, that he's had these attempts on Donald Trump's life. And I think her name's Caitlin over at CNN. She said there's no proof that the media contributed to that in any way. And he said, calling him Hitler for 9 years didn't contribute to somebody going, I should probably take out Hitler. Right. So it's like they're delusional about their contribution to this problem. You talked about replacement. If you were to take over a native population, you could do it in 2 ways. Number one, get them to stop breeding or reproducing that population, and then replace them with a new population, right? That's exactly what the Democrat Party is doing. They're saying, Americans, kill your babies, have abortions, and then we're going to bring in people from El Salvador, Nicaragua, China, Afghanistan, Mexico. We're going to replace you, Haitians. So like they can't pretend like people don't have their eyes open and they're going, wait a minute, you're making life really expensive for me. I have to work hard to make money that's taxed, and these newbies get to come in and use my tax money, and they get a larger amount than I get, and they don't get taxed. How are we supposed to compete? And the answer is you're not. They just want to, grind you into the ground and completely control you.
Well, and there's a name for it too. I mean, it is a hybrid form of warfare, and that's actually what Norway is calling it. Norway, it's funny, is actually concerned about Russia using immigration to flood their own country and weaken them. And now Norway is contemplating and making efforts now to shore up their own border with, guess what, walls and so on and so forth, and following in the footsteps of Finland, what they've done. So you have all these countries that are trying to prevent this. But, you pointed out, and there are a number of vile reasons for flooding the country with illegals, but just fundamentally with no emotion attached to it. The quintessential problem, of course, when you call it like hybrid warfare, I mean, it destroys the economy and it destroys obviously the culture too, but economically. And Vance was right to point that out many times. I mean, when Americans now are competing with low-skilled, cheap labor forces that have been imported, to the tune of 20. I mean, think about this. He kept talking about tariffs and was trying to set the record straight on tariffs and why those are useful in certain scenarios, like with China. But we have been listening to the experts, right, shipping all of our manufacturing overseas, and they are using slave labor to give those goods back to us at a fraction of the cost of what it would take to pay somebody a living wage, if you will, here in the United States of America. But the same thing effectively is happening when you import those people to your country. So, what happens even if you bring manufacturing back to the United States of America, right? If you've got 20 million illegals here who are willing to work for, $6 an hour or $5 an hour, or even $10 an hour, whatever it is, that's going to have the same scenario. So in effect, you could actually solve the problem and bring manufacturing back to the United States of America. But if then you're going to have 20 million illegals here, you're going to be in the same situation, because now you're just going to have those same companies hiring, low skilled workers here instead of paying, letting China do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me talk about making life more affordable. JD Vance hit on this many times. I felt like he really stuck it to Tim Walz. Let's react to that video together.
We bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles. I hope.
All right. Just like you said earlier, masterclass. He divided him so good. He said, man, I feel bad for you, Tim Walz. You are stuck between having to admit that life was better under Donald Trump, that life was more affordable, that people could get food and housing. And then now you're stuck between that and Kamala Harris's disastrous economic policy of higher gas prices, higher grocery prices, and higher housing. Just a masterclass. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the things that actually stuck out to me this time watching the clip, even though I watched the debate last night live, is that, JD Vance repeatedly talked about his background, and he's not a fraud. It's not only documented in his, memoir, but it's actually true as well about growing up in poverty. His mom addicted to substances, drugs, and he's the real deal. And it's interesting because the media is doing everything they can, and the candidates themselves, in terms of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, to propagandists, liars, and frauds. They're trying so hard to relate to the American people, to make the American people think that they are, in fact, have JD Vance's story, right? Kamala Harris repeatedly lying about her upbringing, when she actually grew up in Canada in one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. And her parents, both of them had PhDs, and it's, a fraction of the population has parents that have two parents with PhDs. So none of that's true. She's not this middle-class kid, but JD Vance is relatable. He actually does understand through his own experience what the American people are suffering through. And it just reminds me how desperate the media is, and the Democrat Party, to lie about who they are, and of course who their opponents are too. And JD Vance has a story that is inspiring to the American people, and he is what they want Kamala Harris and Tim Walz to be, but of course they are not those things.
Yeah. I read one time that the reason that the Democrats were so mad about his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, was that it put a spotlight on the fact that there is poverty, a lot of poverty in the white community in America. And they don't want that. They want only the black community to have poverty issues, right? Because that they're trying to appeal to their voter base. Oh, we can't let people know that there are white people that have financial problems, right? And so, but you juxtapose that with, he grows up lower income family, and you have Kamala Harris that keeps saying, I'm middle class, I'm middle class. She grew up very wealthy. She grew up in one of the most posh neighborhoods in Canada, not in America, in Canada. And so just a difference. But again, coming back to like Mr. Walz, how do you change the mind of the American people that Donald Trump isn't going to work his guts out to make life more affordable, where your candidate, your running mate, has already made life extremely expensive? How is she going to do that? And she's already had an opportunity to change that, and she's refused to do it.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised they really delved into the climate change issue as much as they did last night. Kamala Harris has stayed away from that. And it's funny because in 2020, I had Democrats telling me, they couldn't come up with a reason to vote for Joe Biden except that he was going to re-enter the Paris Climate Accords and save, the world as we know it. And that's gone. You don't hear a lot of talk about climate change. And the reason you don't is because the climate policies, right? They actually are going to exacerbate the economic situation, the dire economic situation that everyone's facing, because JD Vance said something was absolutely right. He brought up, one of the reasons housing costs are up, and that's because fuel costs are up. When energy costs go up, everything goes up because it is the lifeblood of an economy. And of course, the climate, if you pursue the climate change agenda, those well, not only are the prices going to skyrocket further, but you're going to have actually shortages of energy as well. You couldn't even get it if you had the money to pay for it. But that was hindsight's 2020. I'm not criticizing JD Vance's performance. It was amazing. But, that was one of those things where, the American people kind of accept that we're on the defense about the climate issue, even though I agree with Trump 100%. It is a hoax. And I mean, I write like 3 chapters in my book about it, but it's too long, like you were saying before, to get into completely. But that's the issue, and then that's something JD Vance could have offered, I suppose, which is that, hey, let's just accept that, okay, you think that, climate change is real, and, carbon dioxide that we breathe out, exhale, is responsible for it all. Well, if you actually go forward, Tim, with Kamala Harris's economic agenda to address climate change, what is that going to do to the economy and energy prices in America? How is that going to benefit the American people? And they don't want to touch that because that's the driving issue for Americans right now, I think.
Yeah. A good point is, they tried to tie Donald Trump having a different opinion on climate change to the reason that Hurricane Helene was so damaging. And yet, who was boots on the ground the next day? Was it Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or was it Donald J. Trump? It was Donald J. Trump. He was on the ground in North Carolina, then over in Georgia, telling people, we're going to get you food, we're going to get you water, we're going to get you help. Kamala Harris, $47 billion to connect internet. Not one American has internet. Meanwhile, in 24 hours, Donald Trump gets Elon Musk to turn on Starlink, and boom, communication comes back. Where is Kamala Harris? She's out hobnobbing in Hollywood raising money, and Donald Trump is boots on the ground. So you tell me who's dealing with climate change is the guy that's on the ground saying, this is horrible. Let's get you assistance right now.
Yeah, Stephen, I genuinely feel really sincerely sorry for people out there that believe these lies from the left that are going to vote for Kamala Harris in this election, because they've been fed, of course, so many lies. They're voting against their self-interest. And, Donald Trump, fundamentally does love the country. And that's a difference between him and his opponent. And the Democrat Party and Tim Walz and Kamala Harris being the representatives of that right now in this election, they don't care about the American people. And they put everyone ahead of the American people, including themselves. And, you can go back and look at the East Palestine train derailment. Joe Biden wouldn't go and visit that community. Pete Buttigieg wouldn't even go, and they will never accept responsibility for what happened there. When it came to the fires in Maui and Lahaina, I mean, I've been there several times, Stephen. I'm sure people in your audience have been there. It's such a beautiful place. And, you know, that fire devastated them. And Joe Biden took 3 different vacations before he finally showed up and said, hey, I know what it's like to lose your loved ones and your property in a fire, because, you know, I had a kitchen fire one time and thankfully we put it out and it was no big deal. But that, you know, I almost died like your relative died that you're putting in the ground. I mean, these guys are so sick. And, you know, I was thinking about Katrina, to be honest, and I'm no fan of George W. Bush today, but I remember 2005 Katrina, you know, he was on this long extended vacation at his Texas ranch. And 2 days after Katrina hit, he cut his vacation short and came back, and he was flying en route to Washington, D.C., of course. And there's that famous picture of him looking down. He wanted to fly over New Orleans and see the damage himself. And they could, you know, Kanye West came out and said, you know, he doesn't like black people. And they said he wasn't compassionate. And if you compare the media's reaction to, you know, George W. Bush, who waited 2 days to come back from his vacation, to the response from Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or any of these Democrats, if you compare those two, you don't hate the media enough. You cannot possibly hate the media enough for the way they treat Republican candidates time and time again and the way they treat Democrats.
Yeah. Well, that's because the mockingbird media is going to go with whoever is going to promote communism more or Marxism more. And right now, that's the new Democrat Party. Let's switch gears. This is one of the biggest stories in the world right now. You and I talked about this a little bit off camera, but Iran is attacking Israel. They were able to land several large missiles, many people dead. This thing is, it is a tinderbox that could explode very, very quickly. Last night in the debate, Tim Walz directly blamed Donald Trump for Iran's attack on Israel. It made no sense. And J.D. Vance replied, "You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as it has ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine." Basically, quit trying to blame Donald Trump. Your thoughts on this Iran attack on Israel, and is it really Donald Trump's fault?
Well, I would remind people that if you go all the way back to the Obama administration, not only did he send billions of cash, pallets of cash, to Iran, but the nuclear deal that he signed off on between Iran did nothing to prevent them from actually attaining a nuclear weapon. It gave them guidelines to attaining it, frankly. And the media has been so dishonest about this all along. You know, even after Putin invaded Ukraine under the Biden administration, you had the Biden administration still using a Russian diplomat to negotiate on our behalf a deal with Iran to attain, to go nuclear. And so it's not true. And these deals that have been brokered in the past by Democrats are just like this phony border bill. They don't actually prevent illegal immigration. They legalize it. In this case, it was going to ensure that they ended up going nuclear and having the capability of producing nuclear weapons. But even that aside, you have this disastrous administration, which is treasonous in my opinion. Actually, it's a fact, but I'll just say it's opinion for fun. Anyway, but you have this administration that gave unfroze $6 billion in assets not long ago to Iran in a prisoner swap. And so, you unfreeze $6 billion to Iran, and the next thing you know, they're firing missiles at Israel. So who is complicit in the violence in the Middle East? Why would we give Iran any money when we know they're a terrorist state? Why would we do any of this? So, you have to be very, very far gone and indoctrinated and ignorant, frankly, to believe that Donald Trump, who established the Abraham Accords, that was the first president to actually get, wide-scale peace in the Middle East. I mean, people were looking at Israel like its own nation, finally, some of these other countries. And that what happened under Trump. And it was John Kerry and the Obama administration that said that what Trump wanted to do in establishing peace in the Middle East was impossible. And that's the thing. Donald Trump doesn't abide by this pathetic philosophy, this loser mentality that's un-American, which is, I can't do something. He says, show me the challenge, show me the obstacle, and I will find a way to do it. And he does do it, and he has done it. And now under this administration, we have Putin invading Ukraine, not under Donald Trump. Now under this administration, not Donald Trump, we have a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. We have the Taliban taking over the country again. We have violence breaking out, possibly could lead to a World War III situation. It is very possible and very close to wide-scale violence in the Middle East that we have to get involved in. And that's all because of this failed diplomacy of this administration. So, you know, it's fundamentally flawed and untrue to claim that Trump, it's crazy. Like, these things are going to happen under Trump that are happening under Biden. What? Yeah.
The gaslighting is like, no wonder fuel's so expensive. They're gaslighting us so much. It's just like, it's absolutely crazy. Is like, that, you know, anyway, I don't want to just like beat a dead horse, but this idea of blaming somebody for something that happened while you're in office, and not like, hey, this happened our first week, you know, like going back to George Bush, right? I remember in an interview, he said, you know, what they said, what was the hardest part of your presidency? And he said, you know, in less than a year, you know, having this attack, this 9/11 attack, that really caught us off guard, you know, and then you start digging back in and you go, okay, well, maybe Bill Clinton killing 1 million children in the Middle East, maybe that actually did lead to something, right? But like now blaming Trump, even though Joe Biden enriched Iran and allowed for those contracts between Iran and China, and this new friendship between Iran and Vladimir Putin. It's just such gaslighting. Let me, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, it's been on my mind since we started, which is just one of the observations about Walz that everyone should make. And one of the reasons that the Democrat Party will never admit that they've made any mistake anywhere is because if you listen to Walz and the Democrat Party, fundamentally, they believe that the government is incapable of doing anything wrong, and that government can't do wrong and is always the solution, right? Every answer they have is the government has to fix it, and every answer they have is the government didn't cause it. It's not their fault. You just need more government to fix the problem. And so, you know, they need that, you know, to kind of further and propagate you know, this acceptance of socialism, this regressive belief that preexists the United States of America, of course, which is that, you know, we the people are servant and those in government are master, that we need them to take care of us because we lowly people, Stephen and Drew, are incapable of making decisions for ourselves. We need Barack Obama and Tim Walz, who's obviously such a genius, and Kamala Harris, who's so much smarter than me, to tell me how to live.
Yeah. It's almost the opposite of Ronald Reagan, right? The Democrat Party, the government is always the solution and never the problem. And Ronald Reagan said, the government is the problem. The problem isn't that the American people are living too rich. It's that the US government is living too rich, you know, and the worst words that you can hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Like, just run away, you know? But yeah, it's just the opposite of Reaganomics. Okay, final couple of things here, Drew. I thought it was a bit odd for Tim Walz to go on bragging about having the vote and the support of former Vice President Dick Cheney, a man that dragged us into a war with 7 different nations. Over 1 million humans were killed, $9 trillion in costs to the American taxpayer, and all over a lie about weapons of mass destruction that never existed. Why on earth would he be bragging about having the vote and the support of Dick Cheney?
Well, you have to remember that the Democrats really utilize as part of their electioneering strategy the useful idiot, which in this case is the, you know, so-called former Republican or conservative that has seen the light and wants to be communist now. And so, that's supposed to be some kind of victory. Like we're supposed to be, oh, well, Dick Cheney, well, if he's going to support Kamala Harris, well, man, Stephen, I don't know. I thought these people were communists and I didn't agree with it. But now that Dick Cheney's in, I'm all in. And the thing that's so offensive, I mean, it's like getting poked in the eye by these people like Dick Cheney, because, of course, who was it that defended Dick Cheney in the past when he was attacked by Democrats mercilessly, when they made fun of him for going on that hunting trip, for example, and mistakenly shooting one of his friends or hunting partners that was there with him when it came to Halliburton and everything else. I mean, we sat here and put our necks on the line to come to his defense. And think about this too. Donald Trump represents, in even oddly a purer, more effective way, the very things that Dick Cheney claimed to represent in the past, right? I mean, smaller government, lower taxation, right? This is kind of your pro-American party. And so Dick Cheney is now saying that he doesn't support any of that. Like he asked for our support in the past because, that was the philosophy. And now he's saying, well, that's out the window. I support now an open border. I support, the socialist policies. I support, even things out of Soviet Russia, which are price controls that Kamala Harris has supported, taxing unrealized gains, all of these things. And so, to me, it's just a disgrace. But, it's important because these people, this is the deep state we talk about, the uniparty, if you will. And I would just remind people again as a lesson that it's not that hard to understand because these people make their living off of the backs of the American taxpayer, right? So there are a group of people that their livelihoods depend upon a bigger government. And a bigger government, of course, reduces opportunity in the private sector for you and me. So there's always a conflict between the government and the American taxpayer because we are the ones ultimately that have to foot the bill for the government. So the bigger the government is, the less opportunity and money that we have at our disposal. And so it hurts our life. But these people are at odds with us. They are at war with us because they want a bigger government. So that's why you have this clash inevitably in this country.
Yeah. Okay. One of J.D. Vance's final comments was, he said, Kamala Harris has been in office for over 1,400 days, and she's made things worse. She already had her day one. So, he's now asking for his day one to get in there with Trump. Trump had his day one, and look how good things became, right? I just thought that was such a great line. She's already been in office for over 1,400 days and things have gotten worse. She already had her day one. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is another one of those situations like the border where the Democrats want to have it both ways. So they want to pretend, of course, like Kamala Harris as vice president somehow was doing the work of the president in the sense that it qualifies her to be president, right? Like she's this capable leader. And at the same time, they want to distance her from Joe Biden's policies. And so you can't have it both ways. And, if we had an honest media, of course, they would ask Kamala Harris, which policies over the last nearly 4 years that Joe Biden, was responsible for, which of them do you disagree with? Because you were the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which the Philadelphia Fed said was responsible for spiking inflation. You never came out against anything. You bragged that you were the last voice, the last person in the room before, the green light to pull out of Afghanistan. So obviously you supported that. You didn't come out and have anything negative to say about Joe Biden. So, why should we expect that we would have a different experience under a second Biden administration, right, with you as the president than the previous one? So, I mean, it's all ridiculous. At the end of the day, people just have to ask themselves that question that, it's redundant at this point. I've said it on like every interview I've ever done, but it's the Reagan question. Are you better off today under the Biden administration than you were under the Trump administration? And objectively, the answer is no. And that's why the Democrats are so desperate to make this a personality contest, to focus on these different hoaxes and things like that. Because if people actually dig deep and ask that question every single day, they will know that it is in their best self-interest, that of their children, that of the nation, to reelect Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, the media tells me I'm fine, but my wallet tells me a different story, right? Drew, I appreciate you coming on. I want to put a direct link to your book, America's Last Stand, but tell my audience, what is your book about?
Well, it makes the definitive case to every American out there how serious the stakes are in 2024, why this election really is, the most important in our lifetimes, even more important than the last 10 times we said it, why that's true historically. And it's an anti-propaganda book. So all this stuff you're hearing in these debate stuff about losers and suckers and Tim Walz and all this stuff, I mean, that's chronicled in the book about the Inflation Reduction Act. So, I mean, it chronicles that, and it gets into the history of the Democrat Party too, which is their history with racism and welfare. And frankly, it addresses that question that I kind of brought up with you a little while ago, Stephen, which is if you listen to Tim Walz and the Democrats, in their opinion, government's the solution for everything. But if you look at history, government's the problem. It's the cause for the problems we have today.
Yeah. Well said. Drew, Alan, thank you so much for coming on. I always enjoy having a good, deep conversation with you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen.